imagine that we will take up the whole time. This is one of the more important meetings that we're going to have this year to try to get to the bottom of the unemployment system in Kansas and try to figure out how we can help the Department of Labor find some solutions for our constituents. We're going to open it up for a presentation from the Department of Labor, and I believe Julie McGinney is going to be the presenter. We'll have the acting secretary and the deputy secretary and the former acting secretary all there to answer questions for us. And so, Julie, if you can hear me, let me know.
I can. Actually, I'm going to just drive the presentation if they can let me have control. And Brett, Acting Secretary Brett Fleischbarth is going to actually give the presentation, but I don't see that he's been admitted to the room yet.
Okay. Well, Julie, I'd like to, we're going to have quite a few questions, so I'd like to, if possible, cut the meeting in half, give you the first 45 minutes to get through your presentation, and then the second half of the meeting for questions, if that works for you. Can you do that, and can you do it in 45 minutes? We
will certainly do our best to do that, and if need be, we can get started with perhaps Deputy Secretary Peter Brady. I don't see that, I know that Brett is in the waiting room, he said, and Ryan Wright, former acting secretary, I don't see him. Oh, there he is. So if we don't see Brett here, oh, there he is. Okay, so we're ready to go, and I will share the presentation and they can get started.
Okay, so Brett, you're there, Brett?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. Sorry that we stuck you in the waiting room. I don't even know what that is, but can't wait to find out how to put people there.
Not a problem.
Brett, welcome to committee, and thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Make sure you can see me here. Okay. Mr. Chairman, are we ready to proceed?
We can hear you and we can see the slide deck.
Okay, excellent. First of all, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for having us here today. I'm a few minutes behind, but also with us on the call today, kind of driving the PowerPoint, is our Government Affairs Director, Julie McGinney. In addition to help assist with any questions the committee may have, we have Deputy Secretary Peter Brady, as long as Senior Advisor to the Secretary, Ryan Wright, who many of you know was recently in the acting secretary role himself. So very much a team effort at Kdall. So we've got a different group of folks on the line to assist with questions. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. We know there's going to be lots of questions. To the extent we can't answer them on the presentation, we'll make sure and have our team take note of those to circle back with you. I do have a feeling that a lot of the questions, just because we've testified to so many committees over the last few months, we feel the membership is going to have are going to be addressed by the PowerPoint. So hopefully we'll get to most of what is of interest to you and your constituents through the course of this. Julie, you want to go ahead and roll? So just for some top level context, and I don't think we can emphasize this enough, the kind of the scale of what we're facing in the unemployment system and the importance it has to our fellow Kansans. Since March 15th, Kdall has paid out over 3.8 million weekly claims, totaling over $2.6 billion between the regular unemployment program and the federal programs. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I think we look back, I think that's more benefits than we had paid out, I believe, the 8 years preceding the pandemic-related economic crisis. So the scope of this program, how much money is going out, how much people need the program, is greater than anything we have certainly seen in recent memory, including the Great Recession. And this also gives some additional context on there. This is some of the preliminary data from our labor market information services division. You can just see the massive jump in the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate from heading into the pandemic-related economic crisis, the initial really tough days in the spring, and then where we've kind of leveled out since then. So we have seen some improvement, but still at an elevated rate of unemployment, certainly much higher than what we were heading into the crisis. This is really interesting. I did just reference the Great Recession, and for those of us who were involved in government at that time, I think we all thought that would probably be the most significant event we saw in this space for many years to come. And when we were looking at some of our modeling early on during the pandemic, we kind of used the Great Recession as the high water mark, and we quickly learned that what we viewed as being high water was quickly redefined. So the gold line is what's represented by the Great Recession, and as you can see, we dramatically exceeded that throughout the pandemic. The limited black line represents the weekly continued regular unemployment claims. So the takeaway from this is you can certainly see the scope of the economic situation and the impact it had on the unemployment system, as well as just a total departure from what we were looking like heading into the previous few years, heading into the pandemic. So this gives you an overview of the current programs we have available out there. Unemployment claims, PEUC, as well as the, which of course is Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, as well as the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. Initial claims for regular UI looking to be about towards the the data we have from November, about 20,000. Continued claims about 50,000, and then individuals receiving payment were over 30,000 people who were taking advantage of that program. For PUA, total PUA payments for week ending November 21st, or excuse me, total PUA claimants were about 31,000, and total PUA payments were about 157 million. At this time, we estimate about 25,000 claimants have not received benefits from the PUA program because of a non-monetary question on their claim. We are deploying technologies within our PUA system to make non-monetary determinations, and we'll be notifying affected claimants of the information the agency needs in order to render a determination on their claim. So our team is working diligently to resolve that, but I think you'll see throughout the presentation, in terms of our challenges, PUA definitely still stands out in terms of our what we're trying to continue to push through to get core services delivered to folks. Those programs, there's been lots of twists and turns in terms of some of the federal legislation, as well as executive orders that have brought some different forms of assistance into place. On August 8th, President Trump signed the Lost Wage Assistance Program into existence utilizing FEMA. It was scheduled in no later than December 27th, if not earlier. It basically made about $44 billion available until the total account balance decreases to about $25 billion. So legislation was enacted to provide similar compensation for unemployed individuals. So that was a kind of a different program that we had to work through. And then we're also now working through an additional with the continued CARES Act, the mixed earner unemployment compensation. This is again, a new wrinkle from those programs that have already been in place for people out there. It's going to be, we think, a relatively limited number of folks who are going to have the ability to take advantage of that program. They must have earned more than $5,000 in self-employment income in the most recent taxable year, as well as being able to receive regular unemployment benefits. So individuals who could potentially take care of the mixed earner unemployment compensation will receive an additional $100 on top of their weekly benefit and the $300 federal pandemic unemployment compensation benefit that's available. The mixed earner unemployment compensation will run from January 2nd through March 13th. With the continued act, the federal pandemic unemployment compensation came back into play. Originally, those benefits, as most of you are aware, were at $600 with the original version of the CARES Act. That program subsided this summer, was picked up by that Lost Wage Assistance Program, which provided benefits in the amount of $300. It's now back in the form of the federal pandemic unemployment compensation program, which is slated to run from January 2nd through March 13th, 2021. So at some point in time or another, there has been an augmented benefit available to folks, whether through the original iteration of FPUC, transitioning to LWAP, and now back on to the FPUC program. And it's important to note that no application is necessary for that program. That's something that's on us to pick up those claims and make sure that that additional benefit is tied on to the weekly benefit that folks are allowed to receive. You'll see here, these are programs that have expired. We just referenced the LWAP program. In its place was the renewed version of FPUC. And then additionally, the extended benefits. The extended benefits program is a joint state federal program. There are triggers, federal triggers, where we're notified based off an elevated unemployment rate, whether your state comes into being under extended benefits or not. So we have received notification that we are not on the EB program, and we will basically not be paying those benefits until such further time where we're alerted that we have in fact triggered onto that extended benefits program. So that's something that is carefully watched by our labor market information group to kind of gauge if we feel we are in a position where extended benefits will be back in play. So again, this goes back to anticipating what we thought some of your questions would likely be of special importance to your constituents, the backlogs. And this is an area where I think we feel we have some really positive news to share with the committee. In June, we had a backlog of approximately 25,000 unemployment claims. There was just simply too much work for the staff we had at the time. When we went into the pandemic back in March, we had been in such low periods of unemployment for the years preceding that, and our federal funding for the unemployment program is tied to workloads in normal times. So as you're in a really low claims environment, your administrative dollars from the federal government are also really low. So in terms of our customer service reps in the call center, we were in the 20s in terms of total staff. And then the folks on the back end making those adjudications was also a similar figure. So it was pretty apparent that we were overwhelmed quickly in terms of able to process that work. Through the concerted surge activities we've undertaken and all the process improvements we've made, additional resources, we have knocked that backlog down to from 25,000 to 41 claims as of yesterday, which we feel is a pretty significant step forward in terms of service for Kansans in need. There are still folks who are waiting for adjudications, but they are all within the normal standard timelines that USDOL promulgates in terms of what states need to try and hit in terms of timeliness of work. So we've got some other folks out there waiting for decisions, but they're all what we would be kind of at a steady state for what would be a normal unemployment process. For those that are truly backlogged and waiting beyond what we would want them to wait, that's down to 41 claims. WHO is another area that obviously has gotten a lot of attention in terms of backlog of work. In August, we estimate, again, we had a backlog of about 25,000 claims in the PUA program. We have since been working to deploy additional resources and improvements and technologies within the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance program. Since that time, over 14,000 claimants have started or completed the process of uploading documentation so they can get it adjudicated. So this is not necessarily backlog. This is just the number that represents claimants that have started the process. And to put a little context on that, I think it's always important to note, prior to the passage of the CARES Act, PUA did not exist. That was essentially a brand new unemployment-like program, almost separate from the unemployment program that had to be stood up overnight. It brought into play people who had never before interacted with the unemployment system or were never able to take advantage of unemployment. Independent contractors, self-employed, individuals who were disqualified from receiving unemployment benefits for some reason. So significant challenges in terms of trying to stand that, probably the biggest expansion of the unemployment program since the program was created during the New Deal. Just for some context there. Again, trying to read the committee's mind a little bit here. We know the questions we've had from you, that we've interacted with you on an individual basis, and there's a lot of questions out there about fraud. And we want to make sure, if anything, probably this more than any other issue, we want to make sure the committee leaves here today with a firm understanding of where we're at and what we're trying to do to combat this problem. The first bullet point that I can't emphasize enough is, to the best of our knowledge, Kdall systems have not been breached. There seems to be a lot of confusion in this space. This is a nationwide problem. We know from working with our national partners and National Association of State Workforce Agencies, the United States Department of Labor, other states, this identity theft pandemic of its own is nationwide. We have done significant monitoring of our system. We've used outside consultants to monitor our systems. We have pretty significant reporting requirements if we are in fact subject to a breach, and as there is nothing indicating to date that we have had a breach of our systems. So this is really just unfortunately Kansas being in line with all other states that are confronting this separate pandemic of identity theft that's taking place all across the country. It's in many cases sophisticated. It's multi-state. In many cases, it's international. It's coming from all areas, and we're seeing it in both the regular unemployment system and specifically in the PUA system, due to the fact that PUA was so new and had to be stood up so quickly. I think the general feeling nationwide is that it's more vulnerable to these types of sophisticated fraud schemes than the baseline unemployment program. There's been a lot of efforts, again, nationwide to get a handle on the scope of this thing. According to the U.S. Department of Labor OIG, one initial estimate was between 8 and 26 billion. We have seen news reports and some informal, non-public communications from USDOL where there's very broad-ranging estimates that figure could be substantially higher than that, multiples of what that number is right there. But at a baseline, we're talking about nationwide fraud on the UI system in the multiple billions. And I don't think we'll have an accurate number on that, what that looks like nationwide for a long time as states kind of attempt to sort through all of this. It is impacting every state. As I said, the number USDOL OIG gave was 9 to 26 billion. California, there's indications it's 9 billion in California alone. Some states have gone on record in terms of trying to put out some various loss figures out there. You can see they run the gamut. There are multiple states that are projecting or feel they have a good handle that it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. To the extent Arizona and Wisconsin show $6 million, I think that's probably a pretty conservative estimate. So in terms of where we are in Kansas, in terms of trying to isolate that number, we are currently cooperating with a legislative post-audit specific to unemployment fraud. And we're hoping to get a little bit further clarity on what we think the scope of the problem here is in Kansas as part of that process. Next slide, Julie. When we talk about, our systems haven't been breached, and you're wondering how is this nationwide pandemic coming about, this is just something we threw together. These are just a few of examples of the large-scale data breaches that have been in the public domain that you probably read about. Some of you have probably been victimized by it or someone you know. The Equifax breach alone, the media attention that came from that. So the prevailing opinion is there has been so many large-scale data breaches out there. Those identities that were compromised, that personally identifying information that was compromised, are now being utilized against the unemployment system in mass scale. So that's why trying to pin this on just an isolated breach in a single state really doesn't bring in the scope of what we're looking at nationwide. You can just see here from here. Basically, if you're looking at those size breaches, almost everyone is probably involved at some point in time or another in terms of a data breach. Julie, move ahead. Okay, so what are we doing about it? We're doing a lot of things. First, I want to note on the law enforcement. We have been actively engaged with our state, federal law enforcement partners on this issue. We have coordinated with the United States Department of Labor, Office of Inspector General. We've been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI cyber crimes. We are unique in that we are a law enforcement agency. That's pretty rare for a state workforce agency like us. So we are in active practice of our law enforcement staff working with our federal partners to develop and forward information to try and create prosecutable cases at the federal level. So that is something we're working through. We are working to set up an ID verification system through using credit reporting data as a verification tool along with two-factor authentication. That we feel will speak specifically to the ID theft issue. We are in the late stages of implementing and starting a fraud detection tool through Google Fraud Detection application that will basically give our investigators and our fraud staff a much better avenue for looking through the claims that might be fraud versus those that are not fraud. We put a 72-hour hold on all new PLUA applications so they can be checked to see if they are in fact valid claims. There are some weeks we have seen just through our efforts that upwards of 95% of the attempted claims through PLUA are potentially fraudulent. So that 72-hour hold allows our staff to really dig through there and try and determine which claims bear the indications of being fraudulent versus well-intentioned claimants. Our legal staff has reviewed existing statutory structures to see what are the limits we can do in terms of fraud prevention. We have to be in compliance with federal standards of how quickly we pay benefits, so that's one thing we have to work through. We have significant technologies we've deployed and are using to try and prevent abusive internet activity, bots, other bad actors from interacting with our system. That's always a bit of a balancing act because everything we do to prevent fraudulent claims from coming in potentially bears the risk of putting some additional burden or hassle on our claimants. So that's something that we're balancing on an almost weekly basis to try and make sure that what we're doing on the fraud front isn't preventing well-intentioned claimants from engaging. We are constantly working with our federal and state partners. Again, the National Association of State Workforce Agencies has an integrity center. We've been in contact with their staff, trying to see what all of our partner states across the country are doing in terms of fraud prevention, what are the emerging best practices, and implementing where feasible. We run a variety of cross matches. There are several USDOL recommended cross matches, and we are utilizing all of them to try and make sure we're paying benefits appropriately. We launched the www.reportfraud.ks.gov site. So folks who want to report fraud or have been victims of ID theft can go online. They can report that to us. We can get the claim stopped. They can get a police report. And then we've also developed a messaging campaign for the general public and the business community on this issue. Julie? Again, a little bit more information on the reportfraud.ks.gov. It really is a one-stop shop. And it's the quickest way for individuals or businesses who are working through this issue to get that information to us and allow us to not only get them some assistance that they need, but also stop money from going out improperly. In addition to all the challenges in terms of protecting the integrity of our trust fund, the integrity of our federal dollars that are going to claimants, making sure claimants aren't victimized, there's legitimate issues that states are all across the country are working through related to these fraud schemes and the identity theft in terms of tax implications. We were out in front of this pretty aggressively, trying to address this in terms of how we would handle the 1099 process that we go through every year. We were out working with Kdall, national partners, including NASWA, the USDOL, and the IRS. Fortunately, IRS has issued guidance to the states, and it took a little time to work through that. That when there's strong indications that the money paid out was fraudulent and identity theft related, that we did in fact not have to issue 1099s to those individuals. So in fact, victimizing them twice. You're someone who's had your ID stolen, you've had an unemployment claim filed, and then to get a 1099 in the mail showing you owe taxes on that would have been almost doubling down on this. So IRS did the right thing there, and we do have approval to not send 1099s to those individuals who've been the victim of ID theft. Just making sure claimants who've never interacted, there's so many people coming into the scope of the unemployment system who aren't familiar with it. We were really cognizant of not wanting working Kansas to get hit with kind of an unexpected tax bill. So unemployment compensation is taxable, but we don't have the right to just unilaterally withhold that. So in normal times, claimants are given the option. We have sent out a significant amount of proactive communication on this issue, just so folks had kind of a heads up of what the responsibility they had in terms of taxing of unemployment benefits would look like for any benefits they received in 2020. And then we are preparing to open a specialized call center to answer any tax-related questions and issues that claimants, employers, identity theft victims may have pertaining to COVID. So we hope that'll be a great resource. So what are we doing on the employer side of things? We'll run through that. This is a really cool initiative. The Kdall Employer Help Desk was launched. It provides a toll-free number. It provides information on a variety of topics to help the employer community, from fraud, shared work. We're getting between 1,000 and 1,500 calls. You can see the variety of questions we get, from general questions to tax questions to the shared work program. So that's something that has been really well received by the employer community, and we know that through the heavy volume of interaction we're getting. Julie, you want to move on? Again, with the fraud support for employers, the report fraud site that employers can go on and file for multiple claims at once on behalf of their employees. It takes a little bit of that administrative burden off of employers. And again, we are in the final stages of obtaining and implementing ID verification software to work within our legacy system. We hope this will significantly reduce the employer notification letters that companies and individuals have been receiving. If we're able to cut that off and get a much better verification of ID on the front end, we're hopeful that attempted fraudsters in that area are going to go somewhere else and not waste their time trying to penetrate the Kansas system if we've got that up top ID verification. Important to note again, while when funds are come out of the trust fund for whatever reason, that's a burden that's shared by employers in total. Businesses are not being charged for fraudulent claim. They are not receiving that direct charge to their accounts, affecting their individualized tax rates, and that's important to note. I think one of the real kind of unsung heroes of the pandemic in terms of a policy is the shared work program. It's not unique to Kansas. It's a joint federal program that the USDO has encouraged states to utilize for many years. Fortunately, Kansas is one of the first states to adopt shared work all the way back in the 80s. We had huge demand for shared work. It's basically a layoff aversion tool that allows employers to reduce hours and have those lost earnings supplemented by unemployment in lieu of total layoffs. So the good news is we had almost from the jump at the start of the pandemic, we had pretty massive interest from our business community in the shared work program. The bad side was that system was relatively small and niche in terms of how we administered it. It was not a large scale program, so we have really had to scale up to meet that demand. We've automated it. We've gotten surge support. We've got better information materials out there to employers, and we've got in place 24-hour virtual support. So the administration of that shared work program has risen to meet the demand we've seen from the employer community, and the great outcome of that is that improvement to the shared work program, something's going to be there over a period of years, not just as we're dealing with the current crisis. So that's been a real win in terms of how we've responded. Additional employer support. Again, contributing employers should not be charged for any COVID or fraud related claims. Same with rated governmental employers. Reimbursing employers, typically reimbursing employers, they don't pay taxes. They pay unemployment claims dollar for dollar. They've received relief through the CARES Act in terms of 50% on all charges. So the message is, as we send notice of unemployment claims and notice of benefit charges to the employer community, we really want to make sure they're reviewing that carefully. If they feel there's proper charges on there that they should not be charged for, engage with that employer help desk and support infrastructure we've developed to make sure that we get their account handled correctly. Next, Julie. This is another kind of hot button issue nationwide. I know I've been in contact with colleagues almost from the start of the pandemic in terms of this situation and the federal guidance. Can a person refuse work and still receive unemployment benefits? It's a case-by-case basis. It's a totality of the circumstances. We're looking at a lot of different indications in terms of whether the individual is justified in refusing work. I mean, that's a difficult analysis in normal times that has only been complicated by COVID. So after we look at the entire factual basis, a determination is mailed to both parties, and both parties, whether you're the claimant or the employer, obviously have the ability to appeal that. So the Continued Assistance Act added a requirement that states have some procedures in place in this regard, and that is something that we do have in place here at Kdall to meet those requirements in terms of where work refusals can be addressed, where employers can send us that information, and making sure we make timely determinations on those issues. Next topic, which really, I mean, when we're talking about how states and Kansas have responded to the pandemic crisis, it really does begin and end with unemployment insurance technology infrastructure. There was a lot of conversation nationwide in the preceding years of, when there's a next recession, there's going to be the haves and the have-nots in terms of how states are able to respond. That's what we learned during the Great Recession. At that time, there were very few states that had modernized systems, and there's been some improvements in the intervening years, but there's still a significant number of states, such as Kansas, that operate their unemployment systems off legacy systems. And that has really borne out over the course of the pandemic. So there's a lot of confusion about where we're at in Kansas and what kind of the journey is. Kansas, along with many other kind of these legacy mainframe states, instituted a modernization project in the early 2000s using what are called READ Act funds. It's part of the financing mechanism for the unemployment system nationwide. So a pretty significant unemployment modernization project took place from 2002 to 2011. It involved several different phases. There was a lot of technology upgrades that came out of that. I was not involved. I was with the agency at the time in a legal capacity, so I basically looked at contracts for it all day long. But there was significant improvements in some of the technology things, enhancements to our web, lots of different things that came out of that. That project did not come to fruition in terms of a complete modernization. It was ended in 2011 before we were able to, quote unquote, get off the mainframe. So a significant amount of money was spent. We did make progress, but the project never came to completion. So what we had coming out of that was the bifurcated system that we still had when the pandemic hit. We have a mainframe that is still basically used for all of our back-end processing. We also have a web environment. We also have a Siebel case management environment, and it doesn't really fit together as a homogeneous system would. It creates more problems for internal customers, more problems for external customers, and it really makes the implementation and deployment of these new benefit programs much more difficult, and it makes our system much more vulnerable to the extremely high case numbers we see throughout the entire unemployment system. So where we picked up on this was in 2019, Governor Kelly mandated our agency to really dig into modernization and attempt to try and prepare ourselves for when the next recession hit. We've really started aggressively looking at other states, both virtually that were modernized, what their system looks like, as well as conducting site visits with those states that had successfully modernized. We went to Boise, Idaho to look at the Idaho system. We went to Jackson, Mississippi to look at the Mississippi system. Take not only what we liked from their system and maybe the technology foundation, but also kind of really get some perspective on their projects, what they felt went well, what they felt went wrong, what they do differently, what they do the same, and try and get some lessons learned. We started the process of drafting what our modernization approach would be, and that unfortunately hit a bit of a brick wall when the pandemic hit. We just simply did not have the capacity to do anything but try and keep our heads above water and meet the workload. This year, when Acting Secretary Wright came on board, we were able to surge a lot more resources. We made the crucial decision that we were going to try and stabilize the system and pursue modernization in parallel and run both of those avenues. So that's something we've been working on diligently over the last few months. We have dedicated staff, IT staff, project management staff that are working through the types of preparation we need in order to get ourselves aligned to release an RFP and begin a modernization project as soon as possible. In addition, those stabilization activities we've been engaged in are all precursors to getting our entire IT division in place to approach a modernization project as well as manage a new modernized system. So this gives you a little bit of an overview of where we're at right now in line with the required process for projects of this size. We do have a basically completed feasibility study report that needs some additional final touches in terms of budgets and how it integrates with the rest of our system. So we're looking to complete the required approvals here in the next few months, move towards releasing an RFP in the next few months, lock in with a vendor to develop that really detailed project plan, and then break ground sometime this year on a new unemployment system. But again, even though the formalized modernization progress is still in kind of the preliminary stages, There is significant work we're doing, both actual technology work as well as working with our processes to put us in position to succeed regardless of what different direction we may go with an approach on the modernization project and from a technology stack perspective. So work is being done in many different avenues to get us aligned to have the type of Kansas unemployment system we all want. Next. And I think this is a final topic, the trust fund. A lot of concern. Kind of the high level beats on this. Kansas went into the trust fund in the pandemic in about as good a position as any other state in terms of the solvency of our trust fund. It's certainly as good of a position as we had been in Kansas history. We had about just under $1 billion at the time of the onset of the pandemic. So we were extremely well positioned. There are states, and we can get some follow-up information if anyone on the committee would like it. Multiple states were in a position to be borrowing within the first several weeks of the pandemic. We've taken quite a hit. The trust fund balance, again, was about $1 billion in March. That was reduced to about $670,000 July 31st. Our trust fund was certified as solvent on December 1st. It's a statutory process using actuarial measurements promulgated by the United States Department of Labor. So our trust fund at that time was still considered solvent. So we're in very good position compared to many states across the country. There is still significant demand on the trust fund. There's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of what the next few months are going to look like from an economic perspective and how that'll impact our trust fund. So I think the high level points are we came into it really well. We're in much, much better position than many other states, but we're going to have to really stay focused on this issue, monitor it closely, and take the steps necessary to ensure we have a solvent trust fund in the near future as well as moving forward. We have received preliminary, not totally formal notification because they don't do the calculations yet, but the early indications from USDOL is that they do indicate we will be able to, if we had to, sometime this year, borrow from the federal government to supplement our trust fund. We would be able to do it at a 0% interest rate, which is obviously good news in terms of managing the fiscal components of the trust fund. So, and we'll continue to keep the committee apprised of that as we get additional information from USDOL. But their initial feedback to us was, yes, we are in position to borrow at 0% interest if we get to that point. Julie, next slide. The kind of the current demand on us is, again, these federal programs come down. They're very beneficial. They're getting help to people they need. We do have to do the heavy lift to get them implemented. So the Continuing Act came down at the very, very end of calendar year 2020. And to give a little context on this, because I think there is some confusion, every time this federal legislation is passed, the next step in the process is USDOL has to distill that raw legislation down into actionable guidelines for the states. And it's a multi-step process. So they'll issue some preliminary guidance. Oftentimes that preliminary guidance says, hey, more guidance is coming. They'll do an initial call with the states. All the states will be on the phone saying, we need more guidance. USDOL says, we're going to get you more guidance. All the states have the same questions. And that guidance kind of starts leaking out over the ensuing weeks. That gets more general and then more specific on the various implementations. So what we do is we kind of start with our business teams, our legal teams, our IT teams, and start working from broad to specific in developing the business requirements we're going to need to implement everything. If we feel we have a sufficient grasp on what the program is going to require to start actual development, we do that. To the extent we need additional guidance and have to wait on that, we get all preparatory work done leading right up into that guidance. So that guidance started coming out a few days after and has continued over the last few weeks. We are most optimistic about the initial deployment of FPUC, that federal pandemic unemployment compensation. We feel really confident about deploying that here in the very near future. And then following up on that is augmentation to PUA, as well as further revision to PEUC. And then finally, the kind of the longest lift on that is going to be that new mixed earner unemployment compensation program. That's just the reality of that is, again, another entirely brand new aspect of this that's never been done before. So I think you'll see most states are kind of putting that at the tail end in terms of their implementation as they work through okay, now we have MEUC. What does this mean? How do we get it running? Next slide, Julie. We had our team take a quick look just for comparative sake in terms of where states are at. We're pretty similar. There are some states that are a little bit ahead of the curve. For example, Missouri does have FPUC payments already being made. Missouri is a state that was able to modernize successfully a few years ago. And this just gives you a quick feel for where some of those other states land. And I would note, we talked a lot about the states, the haves and the have-nots. Technology is definitely a determining factor in terms of how well states are able to respond to the elevated claims numbers, as well as implementing all these new varied federal programs. It's not a silver bullet, though. Even states that we know had new technology, well managed, up to date, still have struggled to varying degrees with the requirements of these new federal programs and the massive workload. No state has got out of this unscathed without some deterioration in ability to provide services. It's just a matter of how well their system's been able to navigate that and diminish some of the challenges that are out there. But no state has cruised through this thing. And then a quick summary of some of our unemployment-related legislation. Expanding on an emergency basis the Employment Security Board review. That's the last administrative level. Typically, it's a 3-person board. The case numbers are just so high, we feel they need to augment that with some additional board members who have the ability to make decisions. Some provisions related to disqualification and the waiting week and some other items there. And we can certainly go into those in detail, either on this committee call or offline with our government affairs team if anybody has specific questions. And then obviously support for the governor's budget in terms of doing what we need to do to move Kansas forward in unemployment insurance modernization. So we've thrown a lot out. I have the Deputy Secretary Peter Brady and Senior Advisor Ryan Wright on the call as well. Mr. Chairman, we'll gladly open it up for questions. And if we can't answer it on the call today, again, we will take note and certainly follow back up with the committee.
Well, it's impressive. First of all, you nailed the 45 minutes that we gave you for, you were still in the waiting room when we talked about that, but thank you for being so thorough, and thank you for attempting to answer some of our previous questions. Committee, we did, the Department of Labor came before our interim committee several times, and each time it was frustrating because we really were trying to work with them and help them, but this problem was so massive that they just couldn't keep up with it and couldn't give us the answers we needed in order to get there. And so I think we're getting there, and I appreciate that. We do have a few questions. The first one is Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brett, thank you for being here. What is our balance on our trust fund now? This report was from 6 months ago.
Yeah, and that was when they did the solvency calculation. Peter, I don't have that number in front of me. Peter, do you have that number handy by chance?
I will pull it up right now and report back here in a second.
That would probably be one of the things that you would think we would want to know.
Absolutely, we've got that. We've got a whole bunch of information here. I don't have that figure directly in front of me, but again, Peter, here, 1 second.
Yeah, and I just pulled up our weekly report, Representative. For the week ending January 9th, we were at $302 million.
Okay, thank you very much.
And that's an area, just to kind of build on that, because that's obviously a core question. That's an area where we do feel there's the possibility of hopefully some federal assistance down the road. As we mentioned, we're in a much better position than most states. So many states have already had to borrow and are going to be looking at real challenges there. So if you're looking for future federal assistance in the unemployment space, bolstering some of these trust funds is definitely something that potentially could be in play.
Thank you. Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, following along that same, during your presentation, you mentioned that if this gets any worse, you have the opportunity to borrow, and then you just said something about government assistance. So which is it? Will we have to borrow, or will we get government assistance?
There's possibility. So the borrowing mechanism is already in place. the federal government, as part of the unemployment fund system, allows states to borrow for their trust funds when in need. So I think during the Great Recession, something like 38 or 39 states ultimately ended up borrowing some level from the federal government for their trust funds. For states that have met what they call maintenance of solvency requirements, in other words, basically states that have put in the work to try and maintain solvent trust funds and really have diminished trust funds through no fault of their own because of a massive pandemic-related recession, the federal government does create the opportunity for those states to borrow at 0% interest, provided they're able to meet timely repayment schedules. That's already baked into within the federal system. There is a lot of conversation that the federal government, if additional stimulus or spending is pursued in this area of unemployment insurance, that there could be some just direct relief for states in terms of providing additional funds specifically for their trust fund that potentially would not have to be paid back. That's speculative. That's just been something that's been discussed amongst the states for a period of time because there are so many states that are already underwater on their trust funds as opposed to Kansas.
But to be clear, we have not borrowed any money during this pandemic. Is that correct?
No, we have not. We have not. We did borrow coming out of the Great Recession, but we have not to date during this recession.
Representative, there were several times during the interim where the Finance Council wanted to put CARES Act dollars into the trust fund in order to create a barrier. However, the governor vetoed that and she would reference this 0% loans as a way out if we ever get there. And so that's been in the back. That's been discussed several times in the State Finance Council. Sir, could you tell us? Sorry to interrupt you, Representative. Okay, so it's sir, if we do get to that point, there are some requirements in order to carry those loans, and you have to have a certain balance in your trust fund reserves in order to carry those loans and make the timely payments. What do you anticipate the increase to be if we had to borrow, say, $500 million? The unemployment rate increase to our businesses if we were to take out a loan and take on additional leverage requirements with the U.S. federal government?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I don't think I can give you anything definitive off the top of my head. That's something we can certainly take back to our research analysts in our labor market group and try and see if we can run some projections of what the revenue enhancement side would have to look like if we did, in fact, expend additional dollars from our trust fund and then even actually have to borrow. We've been doing trust fund projections kind of throughout the duration of the pandemic, and we've tried to update those as frequently as possible. Most of the initial projections we did were a lot dire than where we are right now, so that's the positive news. The economy has fared better than we expected. But we'll take that as a note, Mr. Chairman, to see what potential kind of projections and different scenarios we could possibly work out with our research team and get back with you on that.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. But my point to the committee is that a 0% loan isn't just a 0% loan that we have to pay back. There could be additional ramifications for our businesses if we have to go that route. Are there any other questions? Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. Brett, can you tell me, have we calculated, do we have a sense of how long it's taking from the time someone applies to the time their claim is processed and they're getting money in their account?
So I'm going to offer a couple of thoughts on that, and then if Peter or Ryan want to offer anything additionally, I'll certainly open up to them as well. One thing that's important to remember is that each claim is unique. Although we have wide swaths of people who are unemployed and facing challenges, each claim still has its unique circumstances in terms of what's happening on that account, the individual reasons why that person is separated, etc. So in terms of a regular unemployment claim, I think you see through the backlog reduction from 25,000 to 41, that timeline is what we would call kind of like the baseline amount you would expect in normal times. There's a normal fact-finding process, but someone could potentially be getting benefits within a few weeks if there's something that has to be adjudicated of when they file their claim. There are other areas of the program, for example, the pandemic unemployment assistance, where there's considerably more challenges, and those wait times are a little longer. So it's really going to vary depending on the specific program you're at, what cycle you're at, and then the individual factors that are presented on your claim. Peter, Ryan, is there anything you'd like to clarify on that beyond what I've said?
The only thing I would add to what Brett was saying is that at the peak of the pandemic, when that backlog was at 25,000, it could take claimants several weeks. I think, in the neighborhood of 6 to 9 was the worst that we saw. With claims being timely now for regular unemployment, we're looking at a 21-day turnaround period for a timely claim. So that's a substantial improvement from where we're at in June and July.
I want to follow up on that. That's a lot of explanation about why the time would be variable, but we do have some internal benchmarks that we've used historically to measure against, to know how long it traditionally takes us to get benefits to people.
Representative Probst, this is Ryan Wright. I just would add, let me mute my.
Hey, Ryan, hold on just a minute, sir. We can't hear you. Your microphone is off.
Looks like we're not able to connect with Ryan. If he's able to circle back in, we'll get his perspective as well. And to your follow-up, Representative Probst, we will take a look and see if we can give you some kind of overall metrics in terms of there. As you indicated, there are substantial of the unemployment context or program that measure what they call first payment promptness and track that timeliness. We can put together some metrics for you specific to that issue over the last several months, if that would be in line with what you're looking for.
Thank you. And then can you remind me, under unemployment, what is the max benefit under our current unemployment? I mean, not including the federal stuff, just from the state unemployment, what's the max benefit?
Peter, what's 474? What did it jump to? We just had an increase this year. Do you have that figure? And I apologize. I think I need more caffeine. For the last few years, it's been 474. It's 488. Is that it?
488, if representative was referring to the time period, state unemployment was 16 weeks. It's now 26 weeks after House Substitute for Senate Bill 27 passed in March.
Thank you.
Okay, we're getting a kind of a long list of questions here. Representative Curtis has a question, and she's online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I'd just like to say to you, Acting Secretary, and to the entire staff, for all the assistance that you've been providing as we try to help constituents. It's very much appreciated. My question is, in a recent conversation in Wyandotte County, found out that there are a number of statewide job openings, and then I think it was around 50,000. And then in Wyandotte County, there's like 5,000 jobs open. And as we look at the challenge of getting people back into the workforce, a couple of things were mentioned to me. One is that they found in Wyandotte County an unwillingness for residents to consider going to workforce partnerships. And as I kind of asked questions and dug into that, there were numerous, of course, reasons as to why that is. A lot of it is people just afraid, to go back, and then the challenge of what they do with, kids at home, that they're homeschooling, et cetera. But two things that were mentioned that I thought I would bring up to you. One is that the access to the KCK Workforce Partnership Office was very difficult during this time due to a couple of things. One was, I guess there was a bunch of road improvements that were being made, and people were just finding it difficult, especially those that were depended on public transportation to get to you. And then the other reason was that the office was just difficult to make contact with because of the lockdown and requiring that you call first to set up an appointment. And I know that I've run into several issues, just, people trying to just connect with with you to try to sort it out and figure it out, especially those that don't have internet access. So I'm wondering, is this something that you're seeing statewide? Is it something you're seeing improved? This was a recent conversation in Wyandotte County just 2 weeks ago. So I'm assuming that it's improving, but I just wanted to make sure that I brought that issue up and to see if you had any thoughts regarding that. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Representative Curtis. That's a great question in terms of that focus on reemployment. With so many aspects of society due to the public health situation, there has been, a diminished level of service throughout that. I think you're seeing more and more of that hopefully coming back online. One key program we work on with our partners at the Department of Commerce, along with the local workforce areas, is reemployment eligibility assistance, where folks who are identified as being likely to exhaust benefits without becoming reemployed get enhanced reemployment services. That program's been offline for numerous reasons, most of them public health related and other challenges, pretty common nationwide. We're looking to get that reinvigorated here in the very near future to kind of start getting that kind of connection for the unemployed and job seekers. We also have pretty regular communication with the workforce system and the 5 local workforce areas as a core partner with them. So we'll flag that as an issue to follow up with our partners in Wyandotte County and just see if there's anything they need from us. Because in normal times, we work with them. We do everything from, we will distribute flyers for job fairs. We will send those to targeted individuals who are on unemployment within a certain county. So we do all sorts of activities with those folks under the WIOA window at the federal level. So we'll flag that, circle back with them, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot of improvement in terms of the reemployment side of things here, hopefully in the next few months. But thank you for highlighting that part of it.
Curtis, anything else? Representative Johnson.
Chair, and I might ask how many questions are appropriate to ask before we move on to the next list.
From you, as many as you want.
Please stop me as we continue through. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for working through things with us. There is a lot that you have to do. I appreciate you taking the time. I look forward to partnering with you as best we can to figuring out how to move forward, because I think our task will continue to be very large. Starting with the early slides, I was trying to get a handle on the trends. As we looked at the unemployment rate being around 3, certainly spiking in April and then coming down to maybe the 6% range. And then looking at the claims on the following page, I think the spike makes sense. It didn't seem to fall in the same ratio that unemployment fell. And if I looked at claims, unemployment doubling over that time, it's a pretty big increase from maybe 15,000 steady state to more like 50,000 at the bottom of the second trough. And I'm trying to think, the first one I think was pandemic related. I wonder if we see fraud coming in early there, and I wonder if fraud is contributing to the claims that we might be seeing towards the end of the chart, to try and line those things up. But it doesn't seem like those two completely explain each other, and I wonder if you had any insights on that.
Yeah, there's, this is data we've looked at, and there's a lot of potential reasons that could be there. Fraud is definitely an indication. Some of the states were hit with fraud very early on. With state of Washington was kind of the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. They were hit very early on in the spring, whereas other states such as Kansas, we didn't really see the onslaught until later. Peter, do you have any, Ryan, any thoughts on kind of those charts, what we're seeing there?
Can you hear me? Oh, great. Okay, perfect. So Representative Ryan Wright for the agency, a couple of things. We're definitely seeing a significant spike in fraud. This has been continuing. We're stopping around 2,300 fraudulent claims a day. There definitely, that factors into the scenario. I will say, as Brett alluded to in the testimony, we're about to bring online some new identity verification tools that we think will eliminate this. But the truth is, as we're seeing this increase in unemployment throughout the state, it is causing these numbers to shoot up exponentially. So, for example, we've added 450 temporary employees to either answer phones or directly work with Kansans needing benefits to work those systems. But as of a week ago, we had 200,000 call attempts in a single day. And that is up significantly, probably over 100,000 in the last month. So we are just seeing, in addition to the fraud aspect, we are just seeing increased volumes as the unemployment rate goes down. Or excuse me, goes up.
Thank you. As we compare to other states, you've mentioned some others. I know there are states that have had bigger total increases in cases. How does the Kansas percent of claims to population compare? I'm trying to get a handle on if we had 500 claims and California had 1,000, we would be the bigger problem, right? So trying to get a sense how those claims might stack up as we get a handle of how we compare.
I don't think that's a metric we have off the top of our head. That's a good note, Representative. That's something we can see if there's any publicly available data on that. There is a bit of a challenge in terms of what states are putting out there as they're trying to sort through this and get a handle on the scope of their fraud problems. So we will circle back with our partners at the NASWA, National Association of State Workforce Agencies Integrity Center, and see if they've got any available statistics on that. If anybody has it, they're kind of the go-to entity that's got that kind of holistic viewpoint. So we'll take a look and see if there's any sort of metrics like that are available.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we can do one more and then we'll get to the list and come back to you.
Well, I'll stick with that topic for the moment. The 450 employees that were added, I'm glad that we have more hands on deck because we certainly need them. Is the funding adequate to support that? Are those temporary? How does that employment arrangement work?
Ryan, you want to go ahead and handle that one?
Yes, Representative Ryan Wright for the agency. So the answer is yes to both. So during the interim, we went back to the State Finance Council and we received $30 million in CARES Act money. That really helped us stabilize the IT systems and also bring on board these temporary employees to assist. And what that also did was allow us to push forward the administrative money that we received from the U.S. Department of Labor. And that's what is intended to fund these spikes. And so we are done with CARES Act money now. We are operating now fully onto that U.S. Department of Labor administrative money. And so far, we think that the money that we have in administrative funds should be sufficient. Of course, the pandemic gets a vote in this, unfortunately, but we do expect that we will start being able to draw down those surge of temporary staff probably after the first quarter of this year. We're still going to have surge staff in place probably throughout this calendar year, but we won't, hopefully, knock on wood, be anywhere close to the numbers we're seeing now. And we intentionally went with temporary employees so that we didn't increase the size of the agency on a permanent basis, and so that we could bend and flex as we needed to with these surge pieces. The one last thing I'll say on the U.S. Department of Labor's administration money, any of that money that we don't use will carry forward and it gets converted into a different account that can be used for modernization. So any money that we can save, I guess is the word to say, or don't use for that administrative money will be used for modernization. So it's one less dollar that that you all will have to put in to help in that effort.
Thank you, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett, I may have missed it in your presentation. Can you tell us how much money was paid into the trust fund by employers in 2020 versus 2019?
The total tax contributions? I don't think we have those figures in front of us, but we can certainly get you that. We know the tax receipts were diminished, obviously, but we can get you that information in terms of year over year revenue. And what we'll do is we'll give you kind of a few years leading into the pandemic as well. And most of our revenue, we'll have a much better picture kind of on trust fund solvency, just to note, in April, because most of the revenue we do get in terms of the contribution side, that's going to come in the first quarter because it is a taxable wage-based system. So employers are paying on the first amounts of those employees' wages. So we'll have a better handle once we get a feel for what those first quarter tax receipts look like in terms of the trust fund.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With your indulgence, I do have 2 questions. Is that all right? Otherwise, you can't hear me? Damn it. Okay, sorry. All right. Okay, we're good. So my first question is this. I have been getting a lot, like many of you, been getting a lot of feedback from constituents, both inside and outside of my district. Anyway, what? Okay, God. Both inside and outside of my district. And a lot of times I get these really, these people who will email me every single day with these terrible, heart-rending stories. And what I want to know is, a lot of times if these are people from my district, in my community that I know, I can call them and I can, trust but verify the same way we do with all of our, issues, right? But tell me how much of these are fraud. Like, tell us about some of the fraud cases that you all are getting, because I know we have the larger end with organized crime and bots and data breaches, not from you all, but from other lists that you spoke about. But what about these more individual fraud bases? What does that look like? Because as we're getting emotionally charged emails in our inboxes, that affects us because we're advocates. Tell us what to look for and what that looks like.
So first of all, that's a great question, Representative. And obviously we all want to know the pandemic has been extremely difficult for so many people, and all of you have talked to constituents in tough circumstances. I have certainly talked with countless people since the start of the pandemic in need of assistance and struggling through tough times. And unfortunately, we've been able to get relief to so many of those people, as indicated by the amount of money we've paid out. In addition to the more sophisticated, again, multi-state, even international-based fraud rings, there's a lot of money available in the system right now. So we are seeing many instances of kind of individualized fraud. You see that in normal times as well. You do see it heightened during periods like this just because there's so many more additional payments that are out there. The vast majority of claimants are doing things the right way and trying to use the programs as they're intended. But we have seen, and we were on a demonstration call with another state, a couple other states, looking at some of these ID theft technologies, and I think it was our counterpoints, might have been California actually, that indicated just how aggressive some of the fraudsters are getting in terms of their willingness to try and perpetrate that they are in fact owed money. I think to your point, if you have concerns on someone you're speaking with, forward that information on to us. We obviously want to do that constituent work and get back, but if you've got indications that it doesn't seem right, it's not a constituent by all means flag it for us and we'll have our staff do a review of that, because we have had a few people that were very aggressive in terms of reaching out through a constituent basis, and then we dug in and got the details of their claim, and simply things just didn't add up. So I think if you've got that, by all means refer it to us as you normally would, and just give us a heads up that you think that something doesn't connect in the story. Because if it's someone genuinely in need of assistance, we want to do everything possible to help them. But if it's someone who's attempting to exploit the system, we also want to make sure that we respond to that and do a full and thorough investigation where needed.
And Representative Clayton, this is Ryan Wright for the agency. I'll just add to what Secretary Flashbarth has said. So, at the beginning of this, and especially when I started at the agency at the end of June, there were significant technology problems. And so this very much was on the agency. But now we've worked through the bulk of those technology issues. There are still some that are there for sure, and things certainly pop up. But if you are not being paid out today, there's a reason why you're not being paid out by the agency. It's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily fraud, but you're either not entitled or a determination still needs to be made. It is fraudulent, or you're just not eligible. I mean, there's a reason why folks are still there. And one of the big challenges we have is now that we've paid out the bulk of eligible valid claims, we're prohibited by law to discuss these claimants' issues publicly. And the media likes to take advantage of this, especially the television stations, not shocking. But the reality is, now that we're drilling down into these individual claimants' accounts, it's almost never as it's portrayed. And so we have a hard time responding to that. One of the things that we're endeavoring to do at the agency is to be more transparent with legislators. As officers of the state, you can get this information if it's a claimant within your district. You're still bound by the same confidentiality rules, but we're trying to be more open and forthcoming, because if you're still not getting paid, there's something complicated about your case, and that is not easily understood. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that everybody that goes to the media or that raises a flag with us is fraudulent. Sometimes this is on us. Sometimes there's a bubble that happens in the system. It is a 70s era technology we're dealing with. But at the end of the day, we've paid out almost all of the valid claims, and we're working through on the PUA side, getting those people that are eligible to be paid. But we have to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so especially in the PUA space, since it's a new unemployment system, since there is significant fraud, we do have to ask additional questions. We do have to do additional scrutiny. And unfortunately, that's just one of the things that we have to do to make sure that we're not paying out fraudsters. And so it's a delicate balancing act that we're doing, but we are going to do better at being more transparent. But I can tell you, the aggressiveness of the fraudsters is shocking to me. And it is what we heard on the call that Brett was referencing was a shocking story that happens in the nursing home setting, which I won't go into in a public space, but they are becoming aggressive. The stories that they tell are heart-wrenching, and sometimes they're absolutely true. And other times they're not, but we have to ask those questions. But we're seeing a huge spike in fraud, and now, especially now with these cases that are left over, there's a reason why they're not being paid, and so we have to do additional steps. We've asked the media to be better stewards when they're reporting these stories. Some have taken us up on that, others have not. And that unfortunately creates a fomenting of this problem. But right now, we are trying to deal with that issue.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. One more. And so this next question just came to me during this meeting. I know that this is part of a larger national story, but how does it look at the state level as far as unemployment is concerned for women? What's that story like? I know that with my kids at home, either sometimes in virtual, sometimes in hybrid, productivity is nearly impossible. How is that looking for Kansas women? You guys might not have the numbers, and I'm totally asking this tomorrow too, Tarwater, so be ready for that. So, but thank you.
So that's an excellent question, Representative Clayton, and we'll give a little plug here. We do put out Mr. Brady referenced that earlier. We do put out a weekly UI report that gives any number of salient details on kind of the state of UI, number of initial claims, number of weekly claims. And for all the members of the committee, that report also breaks it down by county. It also breaks it down by gender. So that can give you like a very high level in terms of the percentage of unemployment claimants who are women as opposed to men. It breaks it down by age demographic as well. And that's something that we post, I believe it's every Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. It might be Wednesday. We can double check on that. In terms of nationwide trends, other than kind of some of similar perhaps articles you've read on the challenges of working families, of home learning and that. I don't think we have any specific metric, but you can kind of track on a weekly basis what it looks like. Broke down here in Kansas, the number of claimants who are women versus men, et cetera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
A Representative Shu, then Burrows, and then we'll be back to the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a very quick question about Accenture and just, has it been everything that you guys wanted it to be? Is it cutting down on processing and wait times like you wanted to? Just wanted a quick view on that.
Yes, and you have a great co-representative there with you. So, fortunately, my kids are at school, or my daughter would most likely be testifying with me today, as she's apt to do. Accenture has been a valued partner. Like all partners, it's our job to hold them accountable. But I think you see the metrics that we've put out there in terms of our ability to reduce the backlog from 25,000 to 41. That would not be possible without the additional surge support resources that we have. Additionally, them partnering with our own internal IT staff has been a critical and ongoing process to stabilize our unemployment system and make sure we can do the type of rollouts and deployments of these benefit programs that we want. That's everything from better monitoring tools so that we're aware when there's a problem, as opposed to a claimant having to be the one that notifies us there's a problem, making sure our servers are up to date, making sure we have adequate testing protocols and testing environment. So the relationship has been a valuable one and has just been one of many factors, along with our own staff, of getting us to the point where we're reducing these backlogs and getting back to more of a steady state for what we would want from an unemployment program. But it's our job to continue to hold them accountable for what they've agreed to deliver us and work with them and make sure we're supporting their efforts as well, as we would with any vendor. And we do have multiple other vendors working with us at a given time, maybe not as large of a presence, but that's just part of our daily management of the program.
And Representative, this is Ryan Wright for the agency, and just add to what Brett said. So in addition to the technology challenges that we've dealt with, we've had to overcome some skills deficits within the technology space at the agency. And one example is, at the beginning of this, we were told we couldn't implement this identity verification, two-factor identity with our existing system. And it was actually Accenture that was able to come in and find a workaround so that we can implement that. And so that was huge. So the ability to tap into that network was enormous. And when we're talking about our programming challenges, they no longer teach the code because it's not just COBOL, it's Cobalt ESAM, which is a unique subset of COBOL. So we actually have to find people that are retirement age to come back in and program. But we reached out to almost 100 IT temporary staff across the country, and we got less than a dozen applications for people that could program in the Cobalt ESAM. So being able to tap into those Accenture resources has just helped us expand our horizons and create bandwidth throughout the agency. And again, the beautiful thing about this private sector solution is that it is temporary. So as soon as we can start shedding these temporary workers, we will.
Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett, I have a question and really a scenario. I have had contact with a few employees who have been, quote, offered their jobs back from being laid off, but they have been, at the minimum, their pay has been reduced from $1 an hour up to $4.50 an hour, reduction in pay, and all benefits have been taken off the table. And they were advised if they don't come back to work, that they will be reported to your agency and not be eligible for unemployment. So can you share with me how we're supposed to deal with those types of incidents, or are you seeing more and more of that? You're muted. I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. You think, again, if we're into this, we'd have that down by now, but I sure don't. we're not seeing more and more of that, so to speak. I mean, the issue of refusing to work has been one presented by the pandemic since the first stages. I think one of my slides touched on it. Even in normal times, that is a really fact-based analysis. So in the scenario you described, we're going to be looking at how much is the salary reduction, what's the reduction in benefits, are they being asked to perform something they're not trained to do, are they being asked to perform something that's below market rate for what they're trained to do. So I can't give you an advisory opinion other than that's something that the agency would look at and try and look at the entire factual scenario. If someone's offered their job back and it's 50 cents less than it was before the pandemic, it would probably be prudent to take that position and maybe look for an additional job they feel merits their level of compensation while they have a job. But the further and farther away you get in terms of changes in the fundamental aspect of the position, in terms of compensation, what they're being asked to do with their skill set, experience, you're more likely to be in a situation where that individual has a good faith basis for refusing the job. I have handled literally probably 50 of these types of cases in court before, and it's not a concrete area of the law. The beauty is a little bit in the eye of the beholder from a legal perspective. But the farther and farther you get down the road of reducing what the position would nominally be, you are more likely to be in a situation where that claimant has a good faith reason for not accepting that position.
Thank you. And what I would like to do is reach out to you, because I do have the email that said the reduction was from $15 an hour to $9.50. All benefits have ceased, and there will be the same job responsibilities and possibly others due to the lack of workforce being called back. So
Yeah,
those are that's pretty egregious. And we hear about fraud, and we hear about employees not wanting to go back to work, but we don't hear often about the employers that choose to take this kind of action, what I would say egregious action against employees, and take advantage of drawing down CARES dollars and other things. I would just like to visit with you more in detail about this particular organization.
Yeah, and we'd be happy to do that. And you touch on a good point, because I do want to note, unemployment takes up so much of the oxygen right now with our agency, and rightfully so. But we do administer a broad range of labor-related programs, and one is the Kansas Wage Payment Act that's administered by our Employment Standards Division. And the basic gist of the wage payment law says that if someone works, they have to be paid as agreed. Now, what you're talking is a little bit more prospectively, but there are occasions where after the fact, after the wages have been earned, you do get situations where employers don't always follow through on those financial commitments. And there is a process whereby impacted workers can file a wage claim with our agency, and our staff will investigate, take statements from both the claimant and the employer, and determine if in fact wages should be properly paid to that employee. So I just want to make sure we put that out there, because again, there's multiple aspects to our agency that are still running full bore even through the pandemic, beyond the unemployment insurance program. But obviously most of the attention these days does go to unemployment insurance.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to bring attention to this issue, because we've heard much discussion that employees don't want to work when the unemployment funds are available. And I find that is not always the case. And this is a particular case that I have been contacted by 3 individuals in reference to these types of incidents. So I appreciate, Brett, you sharing that with us. And as I stated, I will have an opportunity to visit with you in the next handful of days to see what we can do to remedy the situation. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman.
Heard your representative, and I'd be happy to work with you on that. We are putting together an unemployment bill right now, and one of the things we're trying to address is the looking for work aspect. So when you get a minute, we need to talk on that. Okay. Next, we're going to move to Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go back to what Representative Johnson was talking about a little bit on the fraudulent claims. If you look at, and he kind of talked about a little bit on page 5, and then where we saw that, we're seeing that huge uptick, I guess. Do we have an idea, and I know this is kind of what he asked, but I'm not sure it totally was answered, but do you have an idea of what % of the claims are fraudulent? So as far as, and what percent, I guess, are showing up on that chart? Because I know you're catching some of them, but you've also paid out some of them. So what is the real number? Do we have an idea what the real unemployment number is? And then also, what's the dollar amount that has been paid out on the federal side and also on out of our state fund in fraudulent claims?
A couple things, and again, Ryan and Peter, feel free to jump in. First point, we are stopping a lot, and I think it also gives you an idea of the scope. I think slide 11 references we have pretty solid basis to feel we've stopped north of 250,000 fraudulent claims to date. In terms of the metrics, I don't think we have the specific percentages we're looking for. We can say that in many cases, the majority of claims filed under the PUA system are in fact fraudulent. And that's why we've taken the measures such as putting the 3-day waiting list in, so we can filter that out and try and make sure we're only distilling that down to appropriate claims. If you flip that, you'll find that the vast majority of regular claims are valid, although we are seeing different spikes and upticks in frauds on the regular unemployment system as well. In terms of refining that to specific numbers and dollars, I don't think we have quite the level of specificity you're looking for. But then again, that goes back to we are engaged with LPA on their audit of the unemployment program. And hopefully we'll get in partnership with them a little bit more of a tangible number for what the scope of, we gave you that information on other states. And again, that's all estimates. I think through the LPA process, we'll be able to put together a little bit better estimate of, and we've supplied them substantial amounts of data on payouts and things of that nature. I think we'll be able to give you a little bit firmer estimate in terms of what the scope of the problem looks like here in Kansas. Peter, Ryan, did you have anything to add to that?
Representative, the one thing I'll add to what Brett has said is that in addition to working with post-audit, there's other Google Analytics tools that we're bringing on board, and also the identity verification tools will give us analysis tools that we don't currently possess within our mainframe system. And so I think we can't give you that number today, but we do think we'll be able to get a much better estimate of that in the near future. And as Brett testified to in the hearing, those should be, we've started actually utilizing the Google Analytics tool a little bit. Full functionality won't be put in place for another week or so. But between that and the other piece will be put into place, I think, within 2 to 3 weeks. I think we'll have a better handle on exactly what you're asking about at that point.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I know from our past, from the meetings that we've had in the past, the budget committee meetings, the special committee where you testified, I know that some have been paid out. I mean, I know you've stopped a lot, but some have been paid out. And I mean, surely you have a little bit of an idea at this point, those that you've stopped, those that you've turned in to the feds, as far as knowing they were claims that were fraudulent, you should have an idea a little bit of how much has been paid out, I would think.
Well, and Representative, the two things I'll say to that is the regular unemployment system has different checks and balances in it. And so that universe will be smaller. And the PUA system is where most of the fraud is. And the honest answer is we just didn't have the analytics tools to be able to run those scans. It's not us trying to not answer the question. It's us not having those tools yet. But I do think we're going to have some additional tools in the very near future to be able to answer that. Anything that we would forecast at this point would be wildly off the mark.
Okay, all right. And I do understand that probably most of that has been paid out probably has been federal money through the PUA. I mean, just because of the way that, but I still, I mean, and hopefully you can get this to us as soon as possible, but I still would like to really pinpoint well, go back to page 5 of the presentation. Get up here. How much of that uptick is from fraudulent cases? I mean, what are we seeing? I mean, it's got to be some, or if we're seeing a lot of fraudulent cases, a lot of it's got to be showing up in that graph.
So that particular graph, and please, anyone from Kdall, correct me if I'm wrong, those would just be regular unemployment claims that are paid out. So you're right. If there is fraudulent activity, it would show up in these graphs, but it is likely to be not a significant part because these would start out as regular unemployment. Those have those different checks and balances that are built in place and safeguards to not pay out fraudulent claims. The PUA chart may be different than that.
Okay, yeah, I see that's just regular unemployment. So we don't have a PUA chart. You don't have anything put together that would show that at this point.
Not in this presentation, but I do think we have one that we can follow up with you offline on.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'd like to see that if possible. Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. We just had this last week additional 69,000 new claims, initial claimants, and that would indicate, I mean, that's a huge jump from where we've been, and that would indicate that one of two things: either Kansas economy is going in the tank, and it's going in the tank quickly, or there's a lot of fraud being paid. And if you look at the numbers off of the DOL, we've had 984,000 initial claims since March. And we only have about 1.2 million people working, yet our unemployment rate is 5.6%. It's not, it doesn't add up. The numbers don't work. I mean, there's got to be a way to explain that. And then you look at also off of the Department of Labor's website, the U.S. has us ranked very poorly on overpayment rate of 14%. Since July 1st, 2017 to June 30th, 2020. And that's before all this fraud really started kicking in. An overpayment rate of 14%, which is $12 million or something like that. That's just in 2020 is $12 million so far out of the fund. But it was, I think, $124 million over the last year and a half or 2 years. Most of that is accounted to work search requirements not being followed up on, but that's with no fraud. There's no fraud on here. And so I would imagine that the reason that we have a 5.6% unemployment rate, yet we have 984,000 claims, initial claims out of 1.2 million people. How do you put those numbers together?
So there's a couple different things there, and again, we'll circle back with our research staff to make sure, myself, Ryan, Peter are not stating anything correctly. Quick correction: the fact that there's a weekly claim or initial claim does not necessarily mean that has been paid. Weeks compensable that have been paid is a different metric. So I think we're probably looking at a couple different factors, specifically as it relates to recently. We do tend to see a little bit of an increase. There is still a seasonal component to the economy that we do see an uptake in claims this time of year on an annual basis. We have also seen, and something we're being very aggressive in responding to, we have seen an uptick in fraud against the regular system recently, not just related to the PUA system. So a lot of that is going to be fraudulent claims. And the third part, and I don't think we can emphasize this enough, and I think Ryan spoke to this a little bit, and why we have a little bit of a challenge giving you kind of the specificity you deserve and we would want to provide. We have a lot of data quality errors as well. And that goes back to the system component of this in terms of ensuring that the data we have within our system is accurate. That's one of the kind of precursor things we're working on as a prelude to modernization is verifying data and making sure you have a single accurate source of data of the record. So that's something we're working on through many different areas, from our federal reporting to trying to determine different areas of the program that we're having troubles, is that data quality component. So that's a little bit of what you're looking for there, I think.
So the 69,000 claims from last week were just initial claims that weren't paid, but what about the 958,000 claims? These are just initial claims that were or were not paying? Can you give us the claims numbers that are real? I mean, which ones have we paid?
Yeah, we will pull together the total compensable weeks paid as a follow-up.
I'd like to know, of the 958,000 initial claims, how many of them were paid? I mean, if you just give us compensable hours, that's everybody added up. I want to know the number of people, number of claimants.
Right. I think we're thinking the same thing. I'm just different verbiage. So I'm tracking you.
Okay, so we still have several questions left, and we're past our time. The people that were going to testify tomorrow aren't going to make it. Would you be available to answer the rest of our questions tomorrow?
Yes.
At 1:30. So we're on the floor tomorrow, committee, and we may or may not be able to get back here at 1:30. But if we are, we'll ask some more questions then. If we can't come today, I can have you guys slated for Monday if that works for you.
Yep. Just Julie will work with committee staff, and we'll make sure that we're there when needed.
Thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for the thorough report, and thanks for answering the questions best we can. When we come back tomorrow, we had requested several items that you said you'd get back to us on. If we could start with that, at least the ones that you can get an answer for us for tomorrow, if we could start with that, that would be great. And then we'll have committee, I'd like you to go back if you can tonight and listen to the presentation. I'll give you a lot of homework, Vic, but
Mr. Chair.
and we'll come back tomorrow and ask some more questions, but I really appreciate everybody's time today. This really is the most important thing we're going to do in this committee all year. And so please do some homework and come back, because if we don't get the answers that we're looking for, we can't help them with solutions, and that's what we're all here for. With that,
And
we'll
Mr.
go ahead and adjourn.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This is Ryan. Sorry to interrupt you. I know you're trying to leave. If anybody also has any more detailed data questions that you weren't able to answer, if you get those to Julie, we'll do our best to do that research tonight, so we actually have an answer for tomorrow that we may not have readily available. We want to get you all the information that you're asking about. So if there's anything more detailed that you have questions about, we'll try and do our best to get an answer for you tomorrow. Feel free to ask that to Julie offline this evening.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. In committee, we'll have Cindy send you her email address in case you don't have it. And we're adjourned.